You were here dealing with the
All right, everyone, let's get started. Good evening. My name is Elborowski. This is Sarah Gibson, and we'd like to welcome you to the official launch of E4Dev, which stands for Energy for Human Development. It's a community-oriented student group and discussion forum focused on energy and human development in the developing world. A friend of mine suggested that now I should probably just turn off all the lights to make the point that energy is critical to human development in the countries where nearly 1.3 billion people live without access to electricity. While that definitely would have gotten your attention, it would only illustrate a small part of what E4Dev is actually about. Energy for human development as a concept is not only about access to electricity, but more broadly, the link between energy and development challenges. It highlights the often invisible role that energy plays in the services and systems, from food and water to transportation and healthcare, that enable people all over the world to fulfill their daily needs and their long-term aspirations. 3/4 of the world's population still just use 10% of global energy. It's a glaring reminder that energy is only as useful as the people who can use it. Energy is critical to human progress. Energy issues not only present technical problems for engineers to solve, but they bring to bear economic, social, and environmental questions that planners, social scientists, and business leaders must answer. The easiest way to explain what I mean by all this is probably for the two of us to tell you a little bit more about how E4Dev came about. As two first-year urban studies students interested in energy in the developing world, the two of us were independently working to figure out who here at MIT was working on developing country energy issues, and which labs and research centers were coming up with novel ways to address those challenges.
So, eventually, after several conversations with thoughtful professors and astute students from all 5 schools, our efforts and our interests brought us together. And more importantly, they led us to Dr. Rob Stoner and Professor Ignacio Perez-Arriaga, who were planning new energy initiatives for the developing world. So together, we all questioned how could we address the fact that many students on campus with a broad range of backgrounds were keen to find a way to effectively connect, share ideas, debate, and collaborate. So this is how the concept for E4Dev came together. We wanted to fill the communication and the knowledge gap between students and faculty from different disciplines who were independently having really fascinating conversations, or they were building complex technical models to address, for example, the fact that in order to achieve universal access to modern energy services by 2030, new capital investments in the range of about $48 billion per year would be needed. So the aims for E4Dev are threefold. First is to focus attention on the critical state of energy poverty in the developing world. Secondly is to build a collaborative community that has a space and a place to engage with one another. And finally, to develop a deeper understanding for how energy affects nearly every sector, and more importantly, how it affects people's lives. So we hope that E4Dev will demonstrate that although energy challenges involve a technical question, they fundamentally have a human answer. So we are looking forward to having all of you join us every Thursday evening, hopefully just for 1 hour, and we'll have outside guests and professors and sometimes just students work together to meet some of our objectives and probably more. So with that, E4Dev's founding sponsors and advisors, Rob and Ignacio, have really been the ones who truly help us make this possible, particularly with funding from MIT Energy Initiative. Rob, in particular, has been a really dear voice, a guiding voice for me for the past year. He is the Deputy Director for MIT Energy Initiative, as well as the Co-Director for the Tata Center for Technology and Design. Ignacio is one of my new favorite authors. He authored a book, which you guys can see out there. It's called Technologies for Human Development in Isolated Rural Communities. and he is a permanent MIT visiting professor at the Center for Energy and Environmental Policy Research, and he also moonlights as a professor of electrical engineering at UBC in Madrid, Spain. So without further ado, please help me welcome Ignacio and Rob.
Okay, well, good afternoon, welcome here. I was asked by the organizers to explain why I'm here today. So I'll start by saying that I'm an electrical engineer, did my PhD at MIT, love the design of electric machines, the complexity of power systems, the problems of the grid and all that stuff. I've been for many years concerned about the poor of the world, but for a long time I could not figure out a meaningful way, meaningful bridge between my profession and the needs of poor people in developing countries. In the 90s, my career evolved more towards broader topics in energy and regulation in the power sector, and at that time the social perception of energy changed very much with climate change, environmental impacts, anticipated scarcity of natural resources. I used to tell the story of I have a brother which is a physician, and in social meetings with the family and friends, well, he used to attract all the attention, the questions about my back aches or I have this problem or that. And I never got any question about my profession, but that changed. In the late 90s and until now, I get more attention than my brother. So that indicates the role that energy is playing now in our society. So about 10 years ago, my university asked me to give a talk, the inaugural talk in the first day of the academic course. I was thinking very hard what to say, and then I ended up talking about energy and human development. And then I started talking about some figures that we are taught in school, like the radius of the planet, the distance to the moon, or the distance to the sun. But I also talked about other figures that we are not usually talked about at school, like the number of people that don't have access to electricity, 1.4 billion people, the number of people who that have to use biomass or poor resources to get their heat for cooking and heating their houses, 0.8 billion people. The number of people who die because they are breathing unhealthy air in their houses because of this imperfect combustion, and this is 4,000 people per day. In that talk, I tried to present a comprehensive approach to how to address this complex problem, and somehow I made a pledge of devoting time and effort to this topic. Some years later, well, I had the idea of talking to the faculty in the engineering school at my university in Madrid, my other university, and then ask them to write how they thought that the subjects that they were teaching, what could be the impact on human development. And the collection of those reflections of those people were edited as a book that you have outside in Spanish. And that encouraged me to do something else, which is to, and I will be talking about that later, to edit a book on how to address the multiple problems, not only energy, but also water and sanitation and communications and transport for the communities that are more isolated communities in developing countries. While here at MIT, I was talking to Rob Stoner, and we have had some funds from the Data Foundation and from the NL Foundation to work on some projects that have allowed us to bring students to think about these issues. And we realized, Rob and I, that there were many students who were interested in this topic. And then we thought, well, it would make sense to get them together so we avoid duplicities and they can encourage one another and they can exchange experiences. Bob prepared a list of 20 students that he had met during the last couple of months and who had expressed interest in energy matters in developing countries. Rob said that there were even more than that. So on the following day, that was February 20, on February 21st, I replied to his email saying, I think that the idea of organizing an informal workshop and to discuss ideas of possible continuation is exactly what we should do as a first step. And I think it is better that the students organize this themselves. We'll have to appoint somebody as the convener, perhaps. Any ideas? And on the same day, Rob answered, as for who might be interested in putting together an informal workshop, I wonder if Sarah Dimson would do it. Perhaps with Yael Borowski, since they both stopped by yesterday. I'd be happy to run it by them. And he certainly did. On the same day, Yael, shortly followed by Sarah, answered, thank you so much for offering Sarah and I the opportunity to lead and convene a much-needed conversation about energy access. It's great to see such an interdisciplinary group of students who have expressed interest. So this is it. In MIT, it's this simple. You just leave it to the students. Of course, Yael and Sarah are not just some students. They are highly motivated. They know a lot about the topic. They have great ideas and contacts, or they manage to have them anyway, and they are incredibly good organizers. So what we see here today is the spectacular achievement of Sarah and Yael and the rest of the colleagues of the E4D team. So thank you very much to all of you. I am really thrilled to see this high quality and large audience here coming to talk about energy and human development, and that exceeds, I think, our wildest dreams. And I hope that we shall be able to keep all of you interested and on board and to come up with some useful contributions to this tough problem of improving human development, providing better access to modern forms of energy for everyone. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone too for coming, and especially our organizers for responding so quickly to my email and to the challenge, and also to Ignacio for so subtly artfully framing what we have in mind, which is not this every week, but rather a community of people who are in this room, but who we hope will come together and meet informally and exchange views and ideas and support one another in what's sometimes a rather trying road. The road of trying to do something about developing countries. This is something that I came into late in my career, so most of it in industry, starting technology companies, running them and selling them over and over again until I got sick of it. And I wrote a letter to Bill Clinton at one stage and asked, when I began seeing articles about the Clinton Foundation and newspapers, if there was anything shaking in Africa that he needed help with. I got a call back from one of his guys, our magazine, some months later, when I just came out of the office of the chairman of the board of my company, who I'd been having a fight with. And the call landed on fertile ground, so to speak. And he said that we've got this problematic donor in Africa who's just given us $100 million and we don't quite know how to spend it. Would you consider moving to Africa and taking over this agriculture enterprise we're setting up? This was just perfect for someone who spent his career doing condensed matter physics. So I said, yes, of course, we have to go. So my wife and my remaining daughter and I moved to Malawi shortly after. And spent the next 3 years there in Rwanda, and Kenya, and Tanzania, and India, working on not only the problems directly related to energy, but problems related to agriculture, but problems related to processing agricultural output and trying to add value to the commodities that developing countries typically make. And this is an obvious strategy that development organizations have been following all over the world for many years, and it's a good one. And we decided to leap in many situations. One of them was in Rwanda, where we were given access to a large marsh area. There was a lake down below, and we had an opportunity to develop that land for organized agriculture. It was being used informally. We thought we could produce a lot more stuff, and then we could grow tomatoes or soybeans, other products like that, and make them into oil or maybe ketchup. Various ideas. And we borrowed money from a bank to do this because it was a commercial enterprise that was really going to make money, and designed the pumping system and the irrigation fields and everything. And by the time we got about 50% of the way through the design process, which was quite a while, we realized that our pumps were going to consume between 10 and 15% of all the electricity produced in the country every month. And it wasn't that big a field. It was a field that was 1,500 hectares. We employed a few thousand people. It was a very graphic, real-life demonstration for me of the incredible problem that developing countries face in not having adequate access to energy. They couldn't get out of their poverty trap. And so I fooled around with various other projects and had more success in some than others, and eventually decided that the right thing for me to do would be to come back here and contribute somewhere where I might be more effective in developing technology and working with students to see if we could bring more brains to bear, more ideas to bear, more energy to bear on energy in developing countries. And we're doing that for the last few years, and that was the origin of the Tata Center that I mentioned, Ignacio, that we've recently started. And then I see a number of Tata fellows here who are participating in technology development design for India. We hope for the rest of the world as well, and that's terrific. I hope they stay a part of this group. Anyway, we need to get on with the rest of the panel. So enough about me and enough about Ignacio. Let's talk about developing whatever they are and the traps and how to get out of them and what the problems are. So I'll introduce our panel. Even though I know who they all are, I just can't recognize them without my glasses. I'll skip Ignacio. That's all right. I've introduced him already. And I'll go to Michael because he's first on the list. Michael is a professor of economics. He's, in fact, the 3M professor of environmental economics at MIT. He is the outgoing director of the Hamilton Project, which is part of the Brookings Institution in Washington, which he's led part-time for the last 7 years, since leaving his role as the chief economist of President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors in the Obama first term. He also serves on the EPA Science Advisory Committee, and at the same time manages to conduct research across a broad range of fields, including the impact of climate change on people in developing countries and the role of energy and energy policy. Selling him short, he'll say more about all those things, I think. To his left is Professor John Sternman, who's also an MIT faculty member. He's the J. Forrester Professor of Management at the Sloan School and the director of MIT's Systems Dynamics Group. John is the leader in the field of systems dynamics, which has been sort of pioneered here at MIT by J. Forrester and other people in his group. And he's brought this to many areas of inquiry, including climate change. And I think he's taught all of us a great deal about climate change through the clever applications of systems dynamics in that case. And in fact, his techniques have even been adopted by negotiators in climate change discussions as a way of very quickly assessing policy options. He's had a big influence that way in many other ways as well. On Michael's right is Leslie Cook, who's not an MIT faculty. She is a writer for the Financial Times and has lived in China for the last 7 years, writing about energy in China and environment in China, the relationship between those two things. She's written also extensively for the Wall Street Journal and for other publications, which I can't find on this sheet of paper because I looked up in the wrong moment. but those are pretty good ones. She's not an American, couldn't make it today, but I think it's fortunate that we have someone here who really knows a lot about China, because China's kind of in the middle of things, and it's central to the debate about how countries should develop their infrastructure. And they tell us a lot about what options are available to us and what options are available to others. So welcome to all of you. Thank you for giving us your time and thoughts. And I'd like to invite each of you now to state your case. And I'd like to start with Ignacio. It seems on my right, and that's the order I have to turn on this page.
Okay, I'm here again. I have 90 slides for this and my students know that I'm not bluffing. But I think that you will be thankful that I will use them. And I'm going to talk about the personal experience. Basically what I've been doing in this field has been studies. I was involved in some study for regulation of grid in Guatemala, and other studies with some organizations like Energy Without Borders, or Engineers Without Borders, etc. In this case, I was the editor of the book, as I was saying before, looking at how technologies could help human development in isolated communities in rural areas in developing countries. And for that, what I did was with some colleagues of the Royal Academy of Engineering in Spain, and then we contacted some organizations like Engineers Without Borders, Energy Without Borders, Oxfam, Red Cross, National Center for Rural Technologies, entrepreneurs, other NGOs, people who with experience in the field, to cover that topic. And the question that we asked them to answer in this book is how can technology contribute to human development of these communities? And well, I have to explain why first of all, what we understand by human development in this context, why we chose the isolated rural communities. So I will start by saying that by human development, we don't mean just economic growth and per capita gross national product. We are talking about other metrics like that are more directly related to people's welfare, life expectation, provision of basic services, quality of governance, women's rights, level of technological development, things like that. And well, these isolated rural communities are very diverse. So we may be talking about people living in the mountains in the northern part of Peru, in Cajamarca, in isolated farms, quite separated from one another in the mountains. We could be talking about small villages in India. We could be talking about nomad communities in sub-Saharan Africa with herds of camels moving from one place to another. What is common to all of them is poverty, absence of basic infrastructures, very low living standards, and they are isolated not only because of geographical distance, but lack of connectivity in infrastructures, the provision of services, and also because of political and administrative isolation. They are very well organized to resist, to survive under difficult conditions. But the isolation here creates problems of food shortages, health, education, children mortality, etc. And technology could help a lot. Why to focus on these particular communities? Well, because in these communities, technology has the highest potential to make a change. And it also offers the toughest challenges because we have to deal with scarce local, physical, and economic resources. Which are the technologies that we are considering? Well, in this case, we went beyond energy, and we were talking about water and sanitation, connectivity, transportation, communications, and access to information, efficient development of agriculture and forestry, land use, and also adequate capability to respond to human emergencies. The point here is that our first point that we learned is the analysis, the experiences of all these people working in these on the field, revealed that technology, although it's important, is one among several major aspects that are necessary to achieve a sustainable improvement in welfare in these communities. And what we learned is also can be applied also to not only to isolated communities but other ones. So I think that we learned 4 major things in the study. The first one is that it is critical to respect the characteristics of each community and to focus on meeting their actual needs. So the solutions have to be in accordance with their adopted choices, adapted to their specific conditions and resources, and be compatible with the local culture and the participation of the local community. And in this case, to take into account the administrative isolation of these communities and therefore rely on their internal organization. The second point is the need for a careful choice of adequate technologies. It is not obvious the technologies to be chosen, and they are not the same ones that we would use in developed countries for the same purposes of lighting or heating or cooking or communications, water, etc. So the problem is that the situations are very diverse, and there is a scarcity of material and economic resources and difficulty in guaranteeing the sustainability of the projects. The technologies have to be adapted, as I said before, to the local conditions, to minimize external dependence, to ensure maximum control by the communities, and they have to be adapted to small scale, low cost, ease of utilization, durability, robustness. And obviously, priority has to be given to satisfy basic human needs and to free people from tough routine tasks like collecting wood. It is needed to promote innovation because these technologies are not really available and have to be adapted to the circumstances. And in general, the conclusion is that there are no general, all-purpose, adequate technologies because they depend, as I said, on the situation. Third thing that we learned is the importance of sustainability. And the improvements will not be permanent until they are adopted and internalized by the community. And that requires time, persistence, patience. It is critical to account for the isolation from the public administration of these communities and to rely as much as possible on their internal organization. And sustainability, as you know, has several aspects. One of them is social, so that requires the full participation of the users. Environmental, which in this case, given that if I'm talking about energy, we would be relying frequently on renewable technologies, then the environmental impact is lower typically than using fossil fuels or biomass that may cause deforestation and of course has other implications. And the third aspect of sustainability is the economic, which is the most difficult one probably, because it has two sides. On one side is the technical sustainability of the facilities, that is operating them, maintaining them, and the strategies require the use of equipment that is easy to use and maintain, train the users to do repair tasks, to train the local people to take care of the maintenance, or assign the responsibility to some service provider for a fee, but under clearly specified conditions to maintain the installation. On the other side is the affordability. The purchase of the equipment sometimes is not compatible with the income level of the users, and a barrier typically is the initial investment that is needed. So that brings the last and critical issue that we learned, which is the importance of the legal framework, regulation, and the business model that will make possible attracting private investment. The volume of investment that is needed in the case, for instance, of energy to provide universal access is huge, and comparative terms may not be, we may talk about that later, but in order to attract private investment, we have to overcome different barriers, and it is very important to address the problem of scalability. So it is great that some NGOs have a project in a small village and have some solar panels in a school, or do some wells in some other community, all that. But if we want to solve the problem of 1.4 billion people without electricity, or 2.4 billion people relying on biomass for cooking and heating, we need something that could be replicated massively with large companies or with models that are able to multiply many times. And so the challenge can be from two perspectives. In summary, energy access is an opportunity for business. The poor spend every year $37 billion on poor quality energy solutions to meet their lighting and cooking needs. So there is room for private investment, for business, sometimes subsidized, etc. And then the other perspective is the ethical one. And let me finish with a quote by Martin Luther King. He said that our lives begin to end the day that we become silent about things that matter. And so for those who, like me, work in the field of energy, contributing to address the problem of universal access to modern forms of energy is simply something that we cannot put aside.
Hey, John, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Rob. Well, first I'll use some of that to thank the organizers, not just you folks who stimulated them, but the actual people who did the work. And it's great to see the room so full. There's standing room only. It's terrific to see so many folks here in our community interested in development and energy for development. I'll make a few quick points, and hopefully we'll have time to delve into them, and I'll be contradicted, and we can have some great conversation going forward. First of all, although energy is a huge issue, it's only a symptom. It's not the problem. And it's not just energy, of course. It's inadequate access to water, to opportunity to education, literacy, all of the things that Ignacio just mentioned. These are all connected to the energy issue, but they're all still just symptoms. They're not the problem. If we try to solve them as if they were the problem, we will fail, as we failed very often in the past. Earlier this year, a headline appeared on the front page of the Singapore Times. The headline was, "World Sinks into Misery as Policies Flop." And unfortunately, that is all too common in development work and in the developed world as well. So what is the underlying problem? Well, my view is that it's growth. It's population growth and especially economic growth. Now, it may seem paradoxical to say economic growth is the problem when it's the solution every government most dearly wants. They want to develop their economy, they want to grow GDP and GDP per capita as fast as possible. But, and of course, a great deal of growth and increase in material welfare is needed for the poorest of the poor in our world. But you can't have unlimited material growth on a finite planet. And this is not something that's theoretical and distant. Those limits to growth are real, and they're already beginning to bite. Just a couple of quick indicators. We've already, by what I think are good, credible, and multiple scientific studies, exceeded the sustainable flux of resources in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, in terms of the nitrogen cycle, in terms of biodiversity loss, better known as extinction, habitat loss that goes with that, deforestation, ozone generation, and many other elements of the global carrying capacity. And we're on the verge of exceeding many others. By a number of studies, humanity already appropriates about 38 or 40% of net primary production. That is all the primary biomass that's produced net on the planet as sunlight hits the earth. And much of what's left is not available for humans. And by many estimates, there's less than 10% of net primary production left that we could appropriate for our personal use. And that would leave nothing left over for nature or other species. And if you add it all up, many estimates suggest that the global ecological footprint is now 1.5 Earths, meaning we are drawing the resources, the natural capital of the planet, at a rate that's 50% above the sustainable flux. That's obviously unsustainable, and the balance will be created at some point, and it's likely to happen in this century, which is to say, within the lifetimes of many of you in the audience, or at least your children, and certainly for us older folks up here, our grandchildren. So these are not theoretical limits, they're pressing on us here and now. And the great challenge is, how do we create a world in which the poor can attain the development and realize the opportunities and have their basic material needs met in a world that's already overshot the sustainable limits of the finite planet on which we live. That's the defining issue of our age, and it's not going to be solved by just focusing on energy, or just focusing on water, or just focusing on toxics or food, or whatever it might be. Although all of those issues are hugely important, it's fundamentally going to require addressing the challenge of growth. So how are we going to do that? Well, one way is through technological innovation, through invention. And around here at MIT, there's some amazing things happening in our labs where people are coming up with fantastic new ideas that can squeeze more useful work, more energy, more materials, or more of the services that we actually desire out of the resources that are available to us, and while producing fewer unintended harmful consequences in the form of pollution and toxics in the environment, greenhouse gases, and so forth. Absolutely essential, not sufficient. And Ignacio already mentioned why. Because they have to scale. It's about implementation. It's about getting it done. That's not a technological problem. That's a problem of market design and institutional reform and ending corruption and bringing the rule of law and all of the factors that Ignacio just mentioned. We are not going to be able to create both a developed and materially abundant society for the poor of the world, or even for those in the developed world, as long as we have huge market failures in the form of unpriced negative externalities of environmental damage, not just climate change, but all kinds. As long as we have market failures that arise from network effects and complementary assets from multi-sided markets, as long as we have market failures in terms of the tragedy of the commons, which is inflicted already, our fisheries, our climate, and many other resources. So the solution is not going to be just about technology. One of the core messages, I think, is, and it may be a hard message, or an unfamiliar message anyway, to hear at MIT, but technology is not sufficient. There's no purely technological solution for these challenges. It requires innovation in institutions, in social structure, in politics, and in economics. And the third component of this is that even if we solve those problems, and if we scale up successfully and implement those new technologies and deal with those externalities, it's still not going to be sufficient to create a sustainable world that addresses the needs of the poor. The reason is everybody wants more than they have. I don't have time to go into the studies, but I'll be happy to do so in the discussion. But everybody in the developed world wants more than they have. Everybody in the developing world wants to live like we do. And it just can't go on. If we all want to be richer than we are today, richer than our neighbors, richer than Bill Gates, richer than anybody's ever been, and everybody wants to be richer than everybody else, which of course is impossible. We simply set up an unwinnable rat race, psychologists call it hedonic treadmill. And so no matter how effective our technology, and no matter how clever we are at solving these problems of market failures and so forth, it simply relaxes the environmental and resource constraints that would otherwise slow the growth down, and we grow until we hit the next one. Solve that, we grow until we hit the next one, and the next one after that, and the next one after that, until at some point the technology and the innovation and the market reforms won't be there in time, where their unintended harms will overwhelm us and growth will not only stop, but we may find ourselves in a situation of decline or collapse. So if we're going to succeed in this challenge, development within the context of a sustainable society, we're going to have transformation. That's a question of values. Now, it's not our job as scholars, as scientists here at MIT or anywhere else to tell people what they ought to want. But it is our job to research what it is people want and what forces shape what it is people want or think they want, advertising and marketing, for example, that actually lead us towards situations that we really don't want. Data on this are quite compelling. In the developed world, we have more and more material terms, and we are less and less happy. And so we're not even getting where we want to go. Everybody in the developing world is trying to emulate us, and that's where they're going to find their happiness, and it's just not true. So no technological solution, no purely technological solution. Dramatic need for political economy and social implementation and innovation as well, and a need for transformation to end the quest for war at all costs. If you don't address those, more energy won't matter. Nothing will matter. We can never get enough of what we don't really need. Now
Anybody ever doubted that they ought to have gone to Harvard instead? I want to skip over Michael briefly to Leslie Hook, who has seen the future and can describe to us how to get there.
Thank you very much. Well, that's a very hard act to follow with that apocalyptic picture of
I'm an optimist.
where we're going. But I think a lot of those themes that you've touched on have very clear applications in China, where I've been living, working as a journalist. And I'd just like to talk today about, a few specifics. How did China develop? What are China's energy systems? And what were the pros and cons of this model? China not only is the biggest carbon emitter in the world, the biggest energy user, but I also feel like the Chinese development model is being followed by a lot of other countries who look at China as a great success story. I mean, if we're talking about poverty alleviation, it's hard to argue that any other country is more successful than China in the last 35 years at alleviating poverty. Since 1978, we've had 500 million people raised out of poverty. China's GDP in 1978 was just $186 billion, $2,005. So tiny, right? There's nothing happening there. Today, China is, of course, the second largest economy in the world. The economy has grown 5 times in size over the last 10 years. So, on a lot of levels, this is a huge success story. And the Chinese energy system has developed alongside that. The Chinese economy has placed a huge emphasis on heavy industry and steel. Mao Zedong launching Victoria Ford in 1958, famously, his goal was to produce more steel than the U.S. and this was the goal of Victoria Ford. And it didn't turn out very well at that time. His wish wasn't realized in his lifetime, but today China is, of course, the biggest steel producer in the world, and it's a bit of a, I don't know what you call Pandora's box. I mean, it's not, the consequences of that are not fully positive. But basically, China's economic growth has really focused on capital-intensive, heavy industry, sectors like steel, petrochemicals, textiles, all of which are hugely polluting and hugely energy intensive. It takes vastly more inputs and creates vastly more emissions to create the same amount of economic product in China than it does in the U.S. But what we've also seen something interesting in the Chinese energy picture emerge just in the last 2 decades. So if we look more recently, I believe that China's energy needs and China's energy demands have actually started to shape development policy instead of the other way around. So when China's a small economy and growing, whatever is the economic growth driving the energy needs, and now it's the other way around, and China's energy needs and the pollution problems are really becoming a very obvious limit to the economic system. There were a couple of tipping points that led to this. The first came in 1993 when China became a net importer of oil. China is today the world's second largest importer of crude oil. Another tipping
point came in 2007. China became a net importer of natural gas. Another one came in 2009, and China became a net importer of coal. And the reason I mention this is that importing all these resources really set off huge alarm bells in the heads of the Chinese leadership, who said, wait a second, we can't rely on anyone else for our energy, so we need to deal with this, we need to find solutions. And that's actually, that fear of relying on energy imports is a big driver for a lot of the changes in the Chinese energy sector that we've seen just in the last 5, 10 years. China's invested, as I'm sure you all know, huge amounts in new technologies, wind and solar. 40% of the world's nuclear reactors under construction today are in China, and has really moved rapidly to increase its share of renewables, partly in order to reduce its dependence on foreign countries, imports from foreign countries. And we've also seen the pollution problems, which I'm sure you're familiar with, which Professor Greenstone has written about and researched very much, and that's also creating a real limit to China's economic growth and starting to shape the energy choices that China can make. So we have very firm guidelines, that Beijing has very firm guidelines for energy intensity, reducing energy intensity, and for reducing carbon intensity under the 5-year plan. And those are huge energy priorities for the whole country today. And China is moving, relatively quickly in that direction. It's a sort of Elephantine sort of style, but we are seeing real changes in the makeup of China's energy supply, shifting towards natural gas, nuclear, wind, and solar, pretty much as fast as they can within the economic constraints that they face. So. I think the Chinese case raised a lot of interesting questions about, is this a success story or is this a story of failure? Depending on your viewpoint, I think you can really make both cases when you look at the cost of China's development in terms of the environment and carbon emissions. But whatever your conclusion about that, the Chinese model is something that a lot of other countries are following, and China is also exporting its development model by building hydropower stations and aluminum smelters and copper smelters in Africa and Southeast Asia. Whether it's a bauxite mine in Laos or a copper mine in the DRC, this development model that China used is also one that it is really spreading around the world. And so I think that has a lot of consequences for not just for China, but for everyone else too. Thank you.
Greenstone, can you just wrap this up for us?
Yeah, sure. Okay, well, so when I first heard Ignacio talking, I said, okay, well, my talk is going to get slightly higher at more macro level. And I heard John talk, as you know, it would be a little lower. And so I needed more or less for less. So I thought it would be useful to just insert a couple facts. This is MIT, data and facts. I used to always say to my parents when I was in grade school, some children are more visual learners, so pictures help. And the thesis of this is going to be that I think with the challenge that developing countries are going to, in the world are going to face, is finding ways to increase access to energy without unleashing kind of vast environmental problems. So let me just start with one statistic, which I swear is actually true. The average per capita electricity consumption in Bihar, India, Bihar is one of the states in India, is 122 kilowatt hours per year. So we're going to put that in context. In the United States, it's 13,325. And so all of that, Bihar's desire to not live at 122 kilowatt hours per year means that energy growth is going to come, most of the energy growth that the world is going to have in the coming years is going to come from developing countries. And so there's a lot of ways to show that. Here's just one graph. The red line is just the growth in energy consumption in non-OECD countries, and the green line is an OECD country. So it's all going to happen in developing countries. And then I made this especially for Leslie. So there's a lot of talk about China pursuing alternative paths and renewables, things like that. But like China is crushing the coal. They now, this is only from 2011, they now have more than, they now consume more coal than the rest of the world combined. I know there's a lot of talk about building solar panels in China and things like that.
But it's leveling up. It's leveling up.
Well,
China's last
it
year,
must be a data point that I don't have.
last year China's coal consumption only was 2%. Currently it's still growing.
So this would be one manifestation of the growth. Okay, so that was one fact. Another fact, and so this should not be a surprise to everyone, but sometimes there's confusion about this. But fossil fuels are really, really, really cheap, and they're everywhere. And even like compared to 3 or 4 years ago, the world is completely swimming in fossil fuels in a way that was unimaginable 3 or 4 years ago. That's the fracking revolution in the United States. There's now the U.S. is now a net exporter of oil. If anyone is from North Dakota, your state has been ruined by like 20-year-old guys driving pickup trucks, like drilling for oil in North Dakota. And it helps to put some numbers around this. And so there's a lot of assumptions that are buried in this, but I didn't put my thumb on the scale. This is in the U.S., the private cost of producing 1 kilowatt hour of electricity from a bunch of different sources. And this guy, right? Well, that was bad. I think the headline is coal is really cheap. It costs 3.2 cents per kilowatt hour to produce per kilowatt hour electricity produced from coal. It's about 4 cents from new natural gas. This is in the United States where we have low natural gas prices. New coal, with the EPA putting requirements on coal plants, it's about 6 cents. And then you get into the renewables. And these are the low carbon sources. And these are making kind of somewhat favorable assumptions about where you place the wind farm and where you place the solar panel. And the prices are like 2 to 3 times high. And so I'll just make this an observation. We don't want to do that in the United States. We don't like paying 2 to 3 times for electricity. And if the world is going to do something about climate change, I just showed you where all the energy consumption is going to come from. We're effectively going to be, and I'll come back to this, asking the developing world to pay 2 to 3 times if we don't want to have greenhouse gas emissions. So that was fact 2. So now, paradoxically, climate change is projected to impose really large costs on developing countries. And there's a lot of different ways you can show this. This is from some of my own research. So the first is just the change in the number of days that the average Indian will face at the end of the century from 2 different climate models and at different temperature ranges. And so those are degrees Celsius. So the way you would read that is, let's take the red bar at 32 to 34. There'll be about 50 extra days per year where the temperature is going to be between 32 and 34. And there'll be about, Leslie, you're probably good at this. What is C? What is 30 C again? Is it like 90?
Yep.
Yeah, I think 30 is like 90. So the yellow area is all greater than 90. And so these are really, really hot days. And the point is, at the end of the century, if we don't do anything about climate change, this is what the distribution of daily temperatures is going to look like. And we just get tons more hot days. And so why is that important? Well, that's because all the bad stuff associated with temperature is at the hot days. And so there's, this is from some of my own research, the solid red line shows you what happens if you swap a day that's between 22 and 24 for any of the other temperatures there. And what that graph, somewhat noisy graph is trying to tell you is that if you take a day from 22 to 24, and remember India's going to get many, many more of those days, you're going to increase the annual mortality rate by, say, 0.5 percentage point if it's between 32 and 34, and a full percentage point if it's greater than 36. And just as a reminder, you're going to get a lot more of those greater than 36 days. And so this is just one manifestation of the costs of climate change, I think, are going to be disproportionately concentrated in developing countries. Now, I just put on there, for comparison's sake, the blue line, which is taken from the United States, and this is from another paper of mine. And what's remarkable about that blue line is it's flat as could be. You can't even see any, what hot. People basically don't die in the on hot days. And so if you're India, what do you want? You hate that red line. That red line is awful. It's like misery. You die. It's uncomfortable. All these things. You want the blue line. And what's the best way to get to the blue line? The best way to get to the blue line, of course, is to use lots of energy, install air conditioning, and things like that. And so this is part of the paradox that all has. So the fourth fact is that mitigating climate change is going to require large and expensive reductions in greenhouse gas emissions in developing countries. And so there's, again, multiple ways to demonstrate this with pictures. So the whole line there is what would happen to atmospheric concentrations of greenhouse gases if we didn't do anything by the end of the century. And so with this model, it would get to about 650 or 700 parts per million. If the U.S. did something approximating what it proposed to do in 2009, it would pull it down by a little bit. And the key thing is that if you really want to stay at the levels that, people say 350, but that's absurd, but say 450 or 550, there's going to have to be reductions from other parts of the world. So what are those other parts of the world? Those other parts of the world are these guys who really want a lot more energy. And so it's really a challenging situation. Here's one, maybe Leslie will like this one. So this is, if the world was going to go to 550 parts per million, there's a lot of different ways we could get there. But a kind of a standard approach would be to assign certain reductions to various countries. And the red lines relative, so the black line is what China would do by itself without any efforts to reduce CO2 emissions. The red line is if China took its share of the world getting to 550 parts per million. I think John will speak up and say that do more to talk about 550 parts per million. But at any rate, this is the gap is what the world would be asking China to do. So in one paper, I tried to estimate what the economic loss to China would be from getting to the red dots from the black dots. And the present value of that, from the lost GDP between today and the end of the century to get to the red dots is something like $51 trillion. That's like 3 years of U.S. GDP, which is obviously more than current Chinese GDP. And again, I think it just underscores that any mitigation strategy is going to require large reductions in emissions for developing countries. Maybe they're going to pay for it. Maybe we're going to pay for it. Someone's going to have to pay for it. That's the essence of it. Okay, so those are the facts.
Okay, Michael, thank you. So we're now going to have 20 minutes of discussion, and I'd like to really leave the half-hour discussion for you to ask questions. So save up the questions, and we will get to them. So, John, let me return to you just for a moment.
Sure.
Just as a springboard. You sort of drew us in with this Malthusian argument that growth is too fast and this is a problem, but it could be saved with innovation.
Not just innovation.
And then you took it away and you said transformation, which is harder, and then you painted it in the context of a complex system with many interacting pieces, and it felt like all of them had to be solved at once for us to make any progress. I mean, how do you think about starting? How do you organize it?
Well, so actually I am a bit of an optimist in a certain sense. I don't think you have to solve them all simultaneously to do this, but you do have to solve them in a way that is consistent with the structure of that system in which you're trying to intervene. And if you don't, you get policy resistance, which is that headline from the Singapore newspaper. Whenever we try with some, there's a long history of these. I don't need to go into them, but for example, in alternative vehicles, a long history of many nations and private companies seeking to develop alternatives to internal combustion powered by fossil fuels, and they mostly, almost all, experience what we call sizzle and fizzle. Everything looks great for a little while because you're heavily subsidizing and promoting, and there's a little buzz around it, but the minute you think you've gotten to scale and you run out of budget and money and patience for the subsidies, and you pull that back a little, it just collapses. And we've been through this in this country multiple times with electrics and natural gas and so on and so forth, and many other countries as well. So it's not that we have to do it all at once and therefore we're not going to be able to do it. It's that you have to find those high leverage points where the changes begin to be cumulative and self-reinforcing rather than offsetting and self-defeating. And that is possible, but it can't be done with technology alone. So that was part of the message there. So let me respond real quickly to a couple of the, pardon me for this, the alleged facts. I was actually hoping
We didn't organize.
No, it's fine. And everything Michael said is basically correct. The challenge there, the magnitude, the growth in energy demand and coal use in carbon emissions, emissions per capita of carbon dioxide, just CO2, forget the CO2 equivalents from the other greenhouse gases in China is now per capita almost at European levels. And of course, in absolute terms, they are by far the largest emitter in the world and growing the fastest. But one fact that Michael stated, I think, requires some interpretation or qualification, and that is fossil fuels are cheaper than low carbon or renewable energy. So that's not true. What's true is the market price is much lower, but the costs are actually higher, and you heard both of them describe exactly why. Your study that you didn't really talk about, but I think is the most stunning and scary thing that's come out of serious research on this topic lately shows that because of, well, the study was enabled by the fact that there's a natural experiment in China where the government subsidizes coal use in the north where it's colder in the winter times, but not in the south. And his paper on this, which came out earlier this year, is really great. But the result is terrifying because what he shows is there's a loss of life expectancy for the average person in those heavy coal use regions on the order of 3 to 5 years. Multiply that by all the folks who live in China and in every other part of the world that's similarly polluted, whether that is from coal use or VOCs and other waste that's spewing out of the tailpipes of vehicles and factories. And there's an enormous loss of life there. And that's a real cost. So if you actually were to correct those negative externalities, you find the low carbon energy is actually probably cheaper, perhaps by a lot. So what's the true cost of gasoline? Well, it's not $3.70 a gallon or whatever it is you paid the last time you filled up your car. That's just the pump price in the United States. The true cost is probably $10 a gallon, at least, somewhat higher than European levels, because the European levels aren't high enough to lower their emissions from the transportation sector down to the level that would get us to concentrations of CO2 in the atmosphere if everybody did the same share. That lower the risks of dangerous anthropogenic interference in the climate. In other words, keep us from being screwed by climate change.
I want to not go too far in taking this to a very interesting discussion of climate change.
Right. So, but the point is that innovation and high leverage policies are going to have to involve correcting some of those market failures and incorrect prices. And if we do that, then we'll find that the prices of low carbon renewable energy and the access to them will fall through learning curves of scale economies and the articulation of the complementary infrastructure that enables those prices to fall. That feedback loop, that reinforcing the positive feedback loop is happening now, but not nearly as fast as it could be and not nearly as fast as it needs to be happening in order to address these issues.
So I've been spending my week, spend the rest of the week, and most of this week too, with a room full of Chinese leaders from the state governments and the national governments. And I asked them last night about these problems at dinner, and their answer was, well, you guys went through this in your own economic development. You destroyed your environment, you cut all the trees, they all grew back when you got a little richer. these considerations are really a rich country's option. The richer we get, the easier it will be for us to keep these things up. We're on the right path, we're on the same path. So why can't we assume that in the future technology options will be available in the country with a reasonable amount of regulatory control, and they'll simply transition to a low carbon economy?
Well, so I think, I don't want to get too far into the empirical debate, but I think that's whistling in the dark. When, just to take your example of deforestation in North America by farming for sheep, now those forests have been growing back and North America's a net carbon sink. That all happened much, much slower, much lower rates of economic and population growth than in the developing world, in China in particular. And when the world as a whole had a lot of slack, it just doesn't exist anymore today. So take another example, when the potato famine hit in Ireland, the consequence of rapid population growth powered by the potato monoculture, which led to its own demise because the monoculture was then more vulnerable to the potato rust. Many of those people were able to emigrate to other countries. England took a few, the United States and Canada took a lot. Even so, millions of people starved to death. And had they not had the ability to emigrate, the deaths would have been 3 times higher. The population of Ireland today is still less than it was prior to the potato famine. There's nowhere to go now. Every part of the world is full. There's no wilderness left.
So Michael, I mean, I don't like going to the path. I'm no longer feeling good about China. You pointed out that India is sort of on a path to kill itself by trying to provide itself with energy. Raise the temperature and people will start dying. Should we just jump off and start trying to adapt?
Yeah, so first, let me say, if I can give 6 minutes over this slide that John wanted.
Right, I know we don't disagree
Also,
about the externality
okay.
issue, but it's good market price and
Yeah. No, so why are there reasons to be optimistic? Or what should we be doing? The first thing is we should probably be trying to develop real adaptation strategies. I think everyone likes to talk about adaptation and climate change, but no one really knows what it means. I agree with John that the world would be a better place if we had less carbon in the atmosphere, but I just don't see how that's going to happen. But I think we have to stop. You keep working for that, but we should simultaneously really think about adaptation. I think another sensible thing to do is that, unfortunately, we do choose the world, speak for the world, chooses its energy based on the market price, not on the full social cost. One thing we could do is we could stop subsidizing fossil fuels. It's actually worse than, that rarely happens when I talk, so. But that, it's actually worse than choosing basic price ratio. We actually choose kind of negative prices.
Nelson?
Well, not being in disagreement with what has been said, let me bring another perspective, which is adding some statistics to the ones that you have been presenting, Michael. If we look at how to provide energy access, modern energy access to the poor, well, according to the International Energy Agency, 75% of the people without access to electricity will have to be provided electricity off-grid. So coal, nuclear, fossil fuels, I mean, in terms of a combined cycle gasoline, they cannot be used. So, I mean, in that respect, solar is not competing with nuclear or coal. Solar has to be used because this is or some diesel generators in some cases, so the comparison under those circumstances have to be done taking into account the context.
Ignacio, I think that's a good point. Here's my question. That is true for the first couple 100 kilowatt hours, but no one wants to run 100 kilowatt hours only. Again, we consume 13,352
Sure.
on average.
Yeah, I mean, but
all those guys want to be on the grid, and I think over time they're going to end up on the grid.
Well, they are. I mean, these 70% of the people without access to electricity are in places where it is not economical at all to connect them to the grid because you have to I mean, the cost is huge to reach to these people in this mountain, another one that is 1 kilometer from that one, and it's not economical.
The
The-
move to cities, I mean, effectively, they're gonna get more, maybe they may not get more
They are
electricity
going to-
exactly where they are.
Yeah, but my point is that a panel of 60 watts, and the consumption that you are saying, it's 10 kilowatt hours per month, makes a huge difference for the people. So it is having light or not at night, being able to read, to study, have communication, have a radio, have a TV, a high efficiency one, extend the commercial activity, repair shop, some commercial doing some textile, sewing, whatever. It's a huge difference. And the statistics for giving electricity to those people are that universal access will mean increasing electricity generation, at these levels, and I agree that will have to grow, but 2.5%. The demand for fossil fuels of universal access, it would increase fossil fuels consumption by 0.8%, and the CO2 emissions by 0.7%. So it is minuscule. So it is a huge problem that making it that big step of providing basic electricity will not mean anything for climate change or for fossil fuel consumption or for, and in terms of money, means basically $50 billion per year until 2030, which is 3 per 1,000 of the electricity rate, increasing 3 per 1,000 electricity rate of OECD countries. We would pay for that. So it's minuscule, although it is a huge amount of money in absolute terms, and raising it is a challenge.
So I just want to riff off of this a little bit. The debate about it's 120 or 13,000 kilowatt hours per year, I think is missing a really important point, which is that we don't want electricity, we don't want energy. We want the services that energy and that electricity affords. In the famous formulation of Avery Lovins, we don't want energy, what we want is hot showers and cold beer. Now, in the case of the developing world, what you need is light so you can study and get your education, the ability to communicate with the rest of the world, to connect with markets, to create economic opportunity. So it's not just about frivolities like hot showers and cold beer, although I'm not sure anybody here would consider those to be frivolities. So the best way to do that is the least cost way from a total systems point of view, not worrying about just the market price, but including the total social and environmental costs. I think every economist will agree with that. The problem is how do you get that to happen? So it's not about getting on the grid or not. It's not about having 13,000 kilowatt hours a year. It's about what people really need and the best way to provide those services and goods that people truly desire. And if we're going to start thinking that it has to be grid-based, or it has to be central power station, or it has to be this, or it has to be that, then we're not going to get out of the trap that we're in now. I don't know what the answer is going to be. Is it microgrid? Is it everybody's got a solar panel on their roof? It's probably going to be, as Ignacio said in the opening, locally appropriate and different in different places. People tend to think, well, solar can't do this. Wind is intermittent. We can't run the whole United States on either one of those, so obviously they're bad. This is crazy. We don't have a single energy source, primary energy source, that runs our economy today. Nobody says, oh gosh, coal is only this percent, and gas peaking turbines is this percent, and combined cycle is that percent, and hydro is that percent, and therefore none of them are viable. It's going to be a mix of flexible sources that are best suited to meet the goals that people actually have, not just provide raw power.
Let's leave, China, particularly in the West, looking at nomadic groups, people who can't be attached to the grid, and are happily living the lifestyle.
That's true. China has very high rates of electrification, and China's investment in solar has created extremely cheap solar panels, which has the downside of bankrupting a lot of solar panel producing companies, both inside China and outside of China, also through this. But there is electricity. I've traveled far, into a lot of areas, and we do see distributed electrical systems that are completely off grid, especially in Western China and Tibetan areas. Herders have a panel on their charge their cell phone and a light bulb. But I think, you know, those systems are in place, they're working well. The Chinese government has subsidized, you know, solar panels for nomadic peoples. But the problem is those people are not going to be nomadic for very long. I'm trying to remember what the numbers are. I think it's 300 million people, Chinese people, are moving from the countryside to the city within the next 10 years, 15 years. The point being, there's a massive migration underway from rural China to urban China that's leading to this huge jump in electricity consumption, which is kind of what you guys are talking about, a huge jump in consumption of every kind. I mean, Chinese people who live in cities consume more sugar, more pork, more fruits and vegetables than people who live in the countryside. The only thing they consume less of is rice, because their diets become more varied, so they consume less rice. And they consume, to the point, much, much more electricity and have higher expectations for the cold beer and the lunch hour.
Well, and to your point about the growth in their consumption, they also have the fastest growing epidemics of obesity and diabetes in the world, except perhaps for India. So again, the harmful side effects of pursuing the Western model.
Are we off the reservations?
Yeah, so right now, you guys have been giving us a lot of really good information, but we want to take time now to start our Q&A portion. So Rob, if you could help us moderate that, because I think part of this, the group is really bringing in your perspectives and your questions and challenging some of the notions that have been developed. They're clearly challenging each other. So please don't be shy. We yelled on that side if we miss a hand and pointed out, but let's start.
So why don't you guys pick the winners and losers and make it us.
So to risk angering my advisor, Ignacio, the figures you cited from the IEA about the sort of increase in energy demand to meet the universal access scenarios were fairly modest. And I think that's largely because the definition of energy access, or the sort of initial threshold for energy access the IEA uses, is remarkably low. I think something on the order of 250 kilowatt hours for rural communities and 500 kilowatt hours a year for urban communities. Even that's, you know, a third of what we saw for rural India that Michael noted. And so these are all facts from a recent paper from Morgan Bazillion and Roger Peltier Jr., sort of challenging us as a community to think more boldly about the ultimate objectives. So sort of Michael's point that in the end, we all want to be consuming maybe not the level of the United States, but Bulgaria at 5,500 or 4,500 kilowatt hours per year, Greece around the same level. So are we really thinking long-term enough when we think about the strategies that we're employing, not just how do you get the first 250 kilowatt hours, but how do those systems evolve and grow? And to John's point, what's the sort of feedback loops that get us there all the way to several thousand kilowatt hours a year?
Ignacio, he was picking on you.
Well, I think it's more like you, but I think that we have to distinguish and solving the immediate problem, which I think it makes a huge difference to provide basic services, as you said, and longer-term strategy. It would be great if the world would be able to do both things at the same time. I don't think we are not doing it in the first one. So, well, it would be maybe asking too much to think that we would provide electricity, thinking also of the growth. But this is what we should do. Actually, in the project that we are doing for the Tata Foundation for India, thinking of microgrids development, we are thinking of how to design microgrids that eventually would grow, would be connected with one another, and could be eventually, if the distance, makes sense, to be connected to the main grid. Although at this time, being connected to the main grid is not a large advantage. So I fully agree with your point. Hopefully, we will be able to address both things at the same time.
At the back.
Professor Greenstone, I scanned your paper about the actual effectiveness of clean cook stoves, and I've been working with Dr. Ramanathan out of UC San Diego about the clean cook stove project. And your finding, as I recall, is that people stop valuing the clean cook stove as a means of reducing fossil fuel consumption and improving their health after a couple of years stoves out in the third world to reduce soot? And the follow-on question is, if that is in fact a social value, social education issue, would that also extend to if we do in fact put out hydropower, mini hydropower, solar panels, will those also be valued?
I think I just come, this is the paper that came out with this much people.
You know, about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah,
But I just found it.
But you one with this. Yeah, let's let you set the facts straight.
Oh,
On what it said.
sorry, what's the question? We
The
can delve
question
into
is,
details of the paper.
it
but-
seems the finding is what you said earlier. It's not, or actually, what the gentleman from Forrester School said, it's not about, we're going to have solutions that are in technology. We're going to have solutions that are in our way of thinking about our place in the world and the value of these solutions. It's not the technology itself. That's a bad paraphrase, but the answer is not the technology. And I was looking at your background on the panel while you were talking, and your paper said, if I understand correctly, that even though there are clean cook stoves going out and they are reducing mortality due to PM5 particulates and fossil fuel consumption, people stop using them after a few years because they don't value the innovation that's been given to them.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. Let me just focus on a small piece of it. For the record, what the paper did is give some households clean stoves and other households didn't get them, or they got them later. And then we just compared what happened. The households that got them stopped taking care of them, they broke down. But even during the period that they were using them effectively, there doesn't seem to have been any real health improvement. So that's just a fact. I think there is actually an important subtle issue that's been floating around this entire discussion, which is the values we might place as like rich guys in a rich country on preventing climate change, or the values we might place on stopping premature deaths from particulates air pollution. And the subtlety comes that the people in developing countries might place very different values on those things. And again, just to turn to my little graph of India, like, what's going on, but like the challenge is, for those guys, is they want that blue line. They hate the red line. And so, yeah, they're probably willing to take some climate change in order to get to that blue line. And I think that, so to John's point, like, yes, the U.S. should properly price the social cost fuels, but the proper social price in India might be very different than the proper price in the United States, because we have a different valuation on climate change. And it's a reflection of their income levels.
Do we have another question right here?
Yeah, just wanted to build on Jesse's question about where should we go. And I was really interested in Professor Sternman's kind of fact about we're consuming 1.5 times what the Earth is able to produce every year, or sustainably. So what is the picture of the sustainable society that we want developing countries to build up to, and maybe developed countries to build down to?
Well, I think just building off Michael's quite important comment that our values and what we would desire can be different than what people desire who are hungry, who have no safe, warm, secure place to sleep every night, who don't have any economic opportunity or education. It's really important. It's not for us to say what the developing countries' vision of a sustainable world or a healthy, prosperous world would be like. So that's we have to create that together because we're all living in the same world. So we're not separate in that way. But I think the Martin Luther King quote that you read is quite telling on this point. But while acknowledging that if you're poor, if you're hungry, if you're not secure, if you're afraid somebody's going to come and murder you in the night to take your cell phone, or just because you're the wrong color or political persuasion or ethnic background, that your utility function's going to put you in a different place of valuation than people living in the United States. That's quite right, but I don't think it's the whole story. I'm going to be speaking to the Chinese group that you mentioned earlier on Thursday, and one of the things we're going to do is we're going to go through an interactive simulation with them, where they're going to take the roles of the different countries of the world and negotiate a climate agreement in real time, obviously an abbreviated version of the real negotiations. And what happens always, it's binding as the real ones are right now. We don't have a binding framework, we have the voluntary Copenhagen Accord, despite the treaty that created the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. So, but people do take it seriously, even though it's just an exercise. And what typically happens is that their first round proposals end up looking much like Michael's business as usual. Nobody's really willing to sacrifice much for the collective good in order to avoid climate change that they believe is uncertain and distant and is going to be, shared by other people, right? So it's in my interest, I get the local benefits if I burn carbon today because I get all the goodies that that affords, and all the damage is going to be borne by everybody else and especially by the future generations. So why wouldn't I do that? Of course, that's what any rational actor would do. But they don't really understand the consequences for themselves. So one of the things that typically comes out is, even under their business as usual or their first round proposals, it's likely that sea level rise by 2100 will be on the order of 1.5 to 2 meters. And if you look at the map of Shanghai or Shenzhen and you put in 2 meters of sea level rise, those places are gone as functioning cities and economic zones. And the people that I've worked with in the past, I don't know what will happen this Thursday, but I've done this for many groups of senior business and political leaders in China and from China, and they don't understand that. They don't understand that climate change is destroying their own country within the rest of this century, and probably even by 2050, if you take into account storm surge. So it's not just that the utility function puts them in a different place in terms of values. It's that there's an enormous body of ignorance and denial out there that can be overcome and might cause people to have a different approach to what it is that they advocate for and what policies they put into place in their countries.
I have a question for Professor Greenstone.
Could you speak up, please?
Yes.
Yeah, I appreciate the discussion has been sort of away from just solely electricity. I work on electricity, which is great, but when we talk about human development, especially in countries like China, rurally, most energy is not consumed via electricity, it's consumed for heating and cooking. And so solving that challenge is really kind of one of the crux of the mid to near-term options for improving sustainability at the world level. And so, we look at food cookstove programs that they're not extremely efficient compared to the old ones. There's adoption policies, all of those things. And China's already rolled those out, and you can't really do much more on that. I'm kind of curious what other options that you might have looked at to solve exactly that question from a more holistic environmental perspective, maybe not just looking at, health, air pollution criteria pollutants, for example, but also potentially looking at water pollution, looking at carbon emissions, things like that. And one technology that I've looked at before in China was biogas, which I think has a lot of ancillary benefits, which could be provided deployed in China and other areas. So I'm just curious, from a more holistic perspective, what you would encourage.
I think the lesson I draw from my study on cookstoves is that there's, I say this very gently at MIT, not all technological solutions actually the right ones in the real world. And probably be, Ignacio was making this point, there's probably be different solutions that are going to work in different places. And the key thing is to actually go and test over an extended period of time whether or not the people who are supposed to use the actual technology like it and are willing to use it and keep it into repairs and et cetera over a meaningful period of time. So that, I think that would be the generic lesson.
It's very hard with people who depend on biomass to find an economically appealing alternative because biomass is free, particularly for rural communities where they don't charcoal, they just burn wood that they cut down. But you can think about things like biogas, as you say. In some places, maybe even variations on solar cookers can be useful. I think a lot of what we've tried so far is naive, but there are some good ideas out there that can be developed, and people are working even at MIT. But alternatives like compressed natural gas or even LPG, probably natural gas, I think are important alternatives that are available and could help a lot, despite the fact that they are fossil fuels in reducing the amount of environmental degradation and many of the negative health benefits that are health outcomes that result from the use of biomass. So, I mean, it's a very important problem, this problem of cooking energy, in terms of capital that would be required to displace biomass as a primary fuel by providing things like natural gas burners, for example. It's a much cheaper problem to solve in principle than the electrification problem by over an order of magnitude. You make a very good point. It's, I think, an area that's very fruitful for work.
Can I just generalize a little bit? Because I think Michael put his finger on something really important here, and that is the need to really understand what conditions are like on the ground. I mean, think about it. No responsible company in the developed world would presume to spend a huge amount of money to develop a new product or launch a new product unless they've done extensive market research first. And even so, the vast majority of new products introduced fail. So why would we think that just because somebody can come up with a clever technology for a cook stove or a solar cooker or biogas generator or whatever it is, and it's obviously technically superior, and it's low carbon, it's renewable, it's sustainable, that it's going to be adopted or remain in use? It's not. And anybody who's been out in the field knows that, for example, India is littered with rainwater collection systems that are not being used because of lack of reparability, unable to find spare parts, or inadequate skills to maintain them, et cetera. And there's many, many other examples like that. So I think what's important here is if you're a clever engineer out in the audience, you need to come down to the Sloan School and take marketing. You need to come down to the ethnology department here and learn ethnography. And it doesn't matter if you grew up in Bihar. It doesn't matter. You might have been poor as dirt your whole life and been lucky enough to come to MIT. That does not mean you know what it's like there on the ground. In the same way that the engineers at Digital Equipment Corporation, who were terrific engineers, said, well, we don't need to do market research. We're engineers. We know what's best, and we know what our consumers and our customers are going to want, and their company doesn't exist anymore. So you've got to get out there and learn the social science tools that are going to enable you to discover what it's really like on the ground, so you can develop the technologies that people will actually be able to use and benefit from.
Clapping. You right here on the side.
Okay, my name is Anita. First year MBA student at Sloan School. So my question goes along the lines of I think there are also opportunities for quick wins, especially in developing countries. So, for example, the case study, Lagos, the commercial capital of Nigeria, has over 20 million people, but because of lack of infrastructure and poor shared services, practically everybody in Lagos buys a diesel or a petrol generator, and that is definitely not good for the environment when you look at when you aggregate the effects of that. So, for example, if we could look at natural gas, and use it to develop power solutions and make that available to say residents in Lagos only, you probably are eliminating millions of diesel and petrol generators, which definitely will contribute to our objectives, with respect to climate change. So do you have strategies? Could you talk about strategies that developing countries could implement now to resolve some of the some of the energy challenges that they're facing right now with existing and available solutions? Because I think it's good to think about the long term, but there are immediate challenges that we can solve, with technologies that are available right now.
Oh, well, that's easy. You could, developing countries can get rid of subsidies for fossil fuels and take the money and instead give it to people with cash.
So maybe to generalize that statement, I think when you're talking about Nigeria, you're talking about a failure of the utility to provide enough power on the grid for the utility to function. And the fact that it fails to function properly has its origins in common with utilities in many, many other developing countries, in mostly inept regulation and the application of populist policy in creating pricing systems that bankrupt the utility. And it's just a self-defeating cycle that prevents investors from investing in new generating capacity that can make the grid functional. And that's what gets diesel generators off people's back porches. So, I mean, this is a matter of politics and policy that derives from getting good politics in place, competent regulation. And it seems to me that it's not that hard. I mean, of all of the things we've talked about, fixing one's political and regulatory system, or at least the part of the political system that touches the regulatory system, isn't that hard, and people somehow come to.
I don't know, Rob,
Right,
can
right.
we apply the same field test to that we apply to technology? There's a lot of countries that don't function exactly the way we think they should.
Including this one. Right, so we're going down that road in the United States where the grid is failing more and more, and people are buying those diesel generators for backup, and not just because they were hit by Hurricane Sandy. And it's because of a variety of policies that have led to long-term, many years, decades of neglect of the basic infrastructure of the grid, much less the investment that's needed to bring us into a smart grid system that would integrate intermittent and distributed sources in a way that would provide more resilience for the system. But, let me just say that I think the political reform that you're talking about, that is dramatically harder than the technology. It doesn't mean it's insoluble, but just for example, there are many countries in the world that heavily subsidize fossil fuels and food, and woe betide the leaders of those countries, as we've seen in Egypt and Tunisia.
No, we had riots in Nigeria.
Or Nigeria, if they want to cut that subsidy even by a few pennies on a gallon of gasoline or gasoline equivalent. So those are some tough issues.
I mean, if you want to have a private investor, you need, say, credible regulation. So it is necessary, as Rob was saying, that the investor thinks that the regulation will stay, will be, as I used to say in my classes, loud, long, and legal. So strong to have incentives, durable, so people trust that the conditions will continue, and orthodox, because otherwise it cannot be long. And without these conditions, you will not get investment, and then you have to enter into this vicious circle. Something that I would like to add to your very good marketing need point is that in some cases you can get something big by creating the right regulatory conditions that have to be compatible with economy. But you may want to create the environment for private investors to come in a utility-like function to provide services to, for instance, universal access. Something that I have seen on the field is that even under those conditions, scalability is very difficult because of the reasons that have been said, that you need to know precisely the anthropological conditions, all the characteristics on the field. For instance, there is an experience of in Peru of providing solar house systems to a number of communities, something like 15,000 people. And they have been successful to create a utility-like method of providing that service. And there is an official tariff that people pay, and the people in that utility-like will provide the service, and they have some quality requirements and all that. Then the government in Peru has the money to extend that to, instead of 15,000, 700,000. And the utility who has done that successfully doesn't want to do it, because the effort that they have to spend with that community of 3,500 dwellings, to organize the community, to organize the maintenance, to do everything, cannot be scaled in the time that politicians want, which is a couple of years for the next elections. So that takes a huge amount of time to extend that in a huge amount of manpower. So there are very important difficulties that are not, I mean, even with the political willingness and the money, you are not able to achieve that.
So we have time for about one or two more questions.
So, Professor Greenstone, in the slide that you showed, showing the different market prices for fuels and sources of energy in the U.S., we saw that because of new regulations and technology innovation of hydraulic fracturing and directional drilling, basically the shale revolution, that natural gas is now cheaper than new coal. And that's allowed the U.S. to significantly reduce its carbon emissions more than any other country in the world in recent years. And so with that in mind, China has a significant shale resource. And so this question is to you and also to Ms. Hook. What opportunity do you think there is for China to develop that, and what impact could that have on global climate change?
Okay, so I'm just gonna the ball up.
Yeah. It's actually gonna be really hard.
Let me go on one fact. Their natural gas from unconventional resources, unconventional drilling resources are about 1.5 times as large as this. Really enormous.
Right, so the natural gas is there under the ground, but can you get it out? That's the question. So far, China's initial shale gas drilling has proven that it's pretty difficult. The gas tends to be quite at great depths, and the shale isn't as brittle, so it doesn't crack as much, it has more clay in it. And also because of the, India colliding with Asia, in the gas-rich basins in China, you have high faulting, so it's hard to drill down and then sideways because of all those faults. You can't stay in your little shale layer. So, so far China has no commercially scaled production of shale gas. There are shale gas wells, but not at a commercial state. The government has very ambitious targets for shale gas. China wants to use more natural gas. They're importing more natural gas. This is part of the Chinese energy strategy is to really shift away from coal towards natural gas because it's cleaner, less carbon emissions. But it looks like they're going to miss their shale gas targets for 2015 because it hasn't been going very well.
So now here's my question to follow. How many guys from Schulmer are there right now trying to figure out?
Not that many. So
Not
the
that
Chinese-
many? Because I would assume they were hiring all the.
They are, yeah, they're coming in slowly, but the Chinese energy sector is dominated by 3 state-owned oil companies, and so you don't see the sort of high-risk wildcatting activity that has characterized a lot of the history of oil and gas development in the U.S. They're actually trying to change the oil and gas regulations to bring in more private companies. Even some Chinese real estate companies are going into shale gas exploration. So the government's trying to change that, but it's basically monopolistic structure, and the pipelines and oil infrastructure will kind of still
Do they think that they'll have lots of petroleum resources too, or is that?
China's the 5th largest producer of oil in the world. They are producing.
No, I meant tidal oil.
Oh, tidal oil from Sichuan. I don't know that they're expecting huge new breakthroughs, but Chinese oil production has kind of just been flat. They've had trouble finding new oil resources, or there've been no large oil discoveries in China.
Just more on natural gas. I mean, certainly shale gas is an interesting subject, and there's shale gas all over the place. And
Right.
And the geology dramatically affects the economics as it does in this country. But there's a lot of conventional gas all over the place. And just we discovered offshore gas in East Africa could potentially have a transformative effect there, and it is now becoming ashore. I think it's an opportunity for certainly developing Africa, and undoubtedly other parts of the world as well.
All right, one more question.
George Miller, MBA 15, or MBA 14. Leslie was talking about a lot of the push within China on developing renewable sources, and nuclear is now a huge part of that. I'm curious, what are the new policy shifts? How is that changing, and what opportunities actually emerge from that? Are they all going to these large state-owned companies, and where is the interaction with that?
Like business opportunities with business opportunities.
Yeah, what is coming from these changes?
Sure. Well, I feel like China really is at a tipping point, or has been at a tipping point, in terms of how China's leaders prioritize economic growth versus environmental protection and reducing emissions. Li Keqiang this spring said, well, it's no good to be poor in a beautiful place, but it's also no good to be rich in a highly polluted place. So you really do see this mindset shift, and I think that will continue to play out in China, and we'll see even more examples of that. People are more aware of the cost of pollution and health costs. So in terms of what policies has China introduced recently to deal with that, well, there are a lot. They are spending hundreds of billions of dollars on their grid, building ultra-high voltage lines, trying to introduce new technologies to the grid. And there are some business opportunities related to the grid, because not all those smart grid technologies are indigenous in China yet. They are building nuclear plants. I think 16 are under construction in China right now, and that's in partnership with a lot of foreign companies, Westinghouse, Arriva. China's also investing a lot in modular nuclear technology that never really took off in the U.S., but some Chinese people at CNNC think it could work. And they're investing a lot in wind and solar. Every Chinese power utility actually has requirements for the amount of renewable energy that they have to own. So what you've seen is some of the big 5 Chinese power companies will actually build a wind farm in Inner Mongolia, even though it's not connected to anything. It's just sitting there. So I think some policies are successful, some aren't. So wind and solar, this year is like a big boom in solar, partly because there's such a glut of solar panels that they can't think of anything else to do with them. But China is the biggest installer of solar panels in the world this year for the first time. And there's also overall goals on carbon intensity and energy intensity under the 5-year plan system, which is 2011 to 2015. So there's national level targets, and those are handed down to the provinces, which are handed down to the counties and the cities. So if you're a local official in some county in Shandong, you know that by 2015 your energy intensity needs to be reduced by a certain amount, which basically means that your county has become more efficient. So it's energy relative to GDP. It's not absolute energy. So you have a very strict idea about what kind of target you have to meet for energy intensity and for carbon intensity. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. And there's a lot of business opportunities too in carbon reduction technologies. Chinese steel mills and coal plants are investing a lot in new technologies, whether it's carbon capture or just the whole gamut. And a lot of biofuels. A lot of Western companies are launching their pilot biofuels plants in China because there are resources there. Like Novozymes, I think it's a big project. It's a big area. It's a big question. So
It's great that the trial is done.
yeah.
Say a few things. The nature of this program I'm running, which John was speaking there tomorrow, is that the central government is trying to get these provincial operators to actually follow a policy because they're ignoring it, because they're facing the local economic pressures to develop, which is what everybody wants, which kind of goes back to Mike's point, that's John's. People want to get to the blue line. I guess
They haven't told us
No.
where the blue line should be.
Third line of mortality as a function of temperature?
Yeah,
Availability.
I guess maybe this is too large a topic to unpack in one minute,
Exactly. We can definitely save it for another conversation. Please join me in thanking our
So late, unbelievable.
I know. Thank you guys so much. I want to thank the panelists for helping us kick off E4 Dev. Next week, it's just us. It's the students, it's the researchers, people who are interested. Again, we've covered a lot of topics, and that's because energy and human development covers so many.
And so what we're hoping to do this week and in the following weeks is turn the discussion a little bit inward. There won't be panelists necessarily each week. We'll bring in different speakers, but we'll let you know. If you haven't signed up on our listserv, you can do so right outside of the room. Angie's back there at our E4DIV table. And then one quick announcement, please mark your calendars for October 17th. We are really thrilled to be hosting Andy Herskowitz, who is the new White House coordinator for Power Africa. It's an initiative that President Obama announced over the summer when he visited Senegal, South Africa, and Tanzania to talk about new the energy initiatives, both from the government side, multilateral side, from the private sector side. So mark your calendars for that big day. But also just mark your calendars for yourselves. We really hope that you join us. We have a bunch of different groups who are working on various issues which our panelists brought up outside. So now is the time to network, connect. We've got food back there. And I just want to, again, say thank you so much for your time and also for your time as well. So come back.